Hello to everyone. Welcome to this seminar. For the ones who doesn't know me, my name is Pietro De Giovanni. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Operations Management. And today we are going to see together an application of conformance quality in a particular context where I wanted to present something that is between OM and OR, simply because this is an OMOR seminar. And in most of the cases, we have presentations OR-based. But today, I wanted to be in the between. So the idea is that we have all the ingredients reported here in this title. So we have quality, we have goodwill, and then marketing reputation. And we have some cooperative programs established by two companies. The idea of this paper came out from a case, and in particular from a survey that one association in Italy is doing relatively to the brand or the label made in Italy. And as far as we look at some food that is made in Italy, then we said, we are going to enjoy our lunch today. And there is, in fact, a lot of advertising and a lot of side effects relatively to the made in Italy products. Nevertheless, there are issues with relatively to this made in Italy, because not necessarily the label that you find made in Italy corresponds to something that has been really produced in Italy and comes from Italy. And today I want to talk about ham, because this association has made an investigation on the ham and finding very curious results. And in particular, they have done this analysis of 27 samples of hams. So they have really went to the supermarket. They have taken some hams from 27 different producers. And they find that 37% of this sample contains an amount of water which is larger than the amount that have been decided by law. The law, in fact, is the problem, since they do decide a certain amount of water which is considered to be legal inside a piece of ham. And this limit is 5%. If the ham is mixed with the water, because this is a compulsory step of the production process, if the water that is inside a piece of ham is too high, consumers are purchasing water rather than purchasing meat. And the fact that the water is present, it is very dangerous for people's health, because the finished product should contain a lot of acids in order to retain this water in the piece of ham. So it is very dangerous to purchase a piece of ham which contains a lot of water. Nevertheless, the problem of the customers is that they are not protected by the international law. And in particular, the international law says, hey, if you are a producer of ham products and you put water in the ham, you are not supposed to report the percentage of water. And this is very bad from a customer side, because they know that the ham contains some water, but they cannot understand the real amount of water that is inside. And in particular, the international law says if the percentage of water it is larger than 5%, then you have to report the word water without indication of the percentage. If instead the percentage is lower than 5%, then you are okay. You can even avoid to report the label water, the word water on the label. And this goes against the customer's health, And in particular, the customers should have a certain number of policies to address whether a piece of M is of high quality or low quality. Because now you can imagine that if I am purchasing a piece of M which contains a lot of water, this is not of good quality. And I suggest you a couple of tests. The first test is on, as you can imagine, on the price. So we can expect that if two pieces are compared and the price is very different, indeed, this price is also a reflection on the quantity of water and M that is embedded in a certain piece. But there are still some type of operational tests that you can do. So for example, you can take a piece of M and you can try to remove or detach somehow the piece of fat. Now, if the piece of fat is coming without any M part with when you stretch, then it means that the fat part has been attached industrially. If instead you take the fat part and you cannot detach it because you are taking out also the meat part, so everything is mixed, then this is a natural piece. Okay, so you can do this test. The other test that you can do is a visual test and is represented by the color of the M. Now, if the M is somehow lucid, as you can see from here, this signifies that it contains a lot of water. If instead the color is very natural, so it's rosé, so very natural, so then you can see that this is most likely a high quality ham. Okay? So now everybody who is eating a sandwich with ham is going to make this test today. So, as I mentioned, there is a problem of international law, and when they go back into the samples, they have found that among these 37 companies, 37% of companies, there are 8 for which they display this label, this word water, so they are okay from a legal point of view. And now, if customers do know about this regulation, then they can protect themselves. And the problem here is really on having an international law that protects customers. So the next thing to be done in the future is to look at an international law that can protect customers when this type of issues are on the table. This is a graph that they have generated through the data. Here you can see this 5% is the limit, and as you can see here, there are a lot of companies who are exceeding this 5% limit. So there are a lot of companies who are producing with an amount of water which is very huge. Think about this one. 30% of the piece is water. And then when you price the product, you can imagine that if you price water, then you price a good product. But there is a motivation for having these two product category in the market. The first is represented by the fact that not all customers are able to afford products which are of high quality, because the price difference, it is very huge. So in this sense, having some manufacturers who are producing low quality products, it is feasible, and it is probably needed, because there is a social part. There is a social part of the community that who cannot afford high quality products, high quality ham. And the problem that emerges is that as far as I am in this area, then there is no information given to customers regarding the quantity of the water. So you can see, for example, that this sample, this observation, has a quantity of water which is very close to the limit, so it is almost good. But the only thing that they have to report is simply the word water in the label. That is exactly the same of what this other company has to do. Okay, so then the customer reads water here, water there, without looking at the number, because this is not what the international law tells to manufacturers, so the customers cannot differentiate. So within this context, we have then decided to put our contribution. Then now I move from OM to OR. And the OR part is that we link this entire discussion to the conformance quality. The definition of conformance quality that has been given in the literature comes back to 30, 40, or 50 years ago. And there have been a lot of definitions regarding conformance quality. Here I'm reporting two which are more linked to the context that I am explaining. The first one is given by this Garvin, who talks about conformance quality as the fact that the design specifications have been met. Okay, now the design specification for us will signify that we would like to have a percentage which is 5% in order to stay within the boundaries defined by the international law, as well as to protect customers, because again we know that higher percentage of water are dangerous, or as the capacity of producing products, goods without defects. Okay, so then we can imagine, for example, that if a product has a quantity of water larger than 5%, I can imagine that this is for me already a defected product, according to these two main parameters that we have defined. But when I go back to the definition of quality in optimal control and dynamic games, I find this type of structure where there is one decision maker who is taking some decisions according to the quality, that in the conformance quality, in this case, it is represented by this Q, capital Q. And this represents the fraction of good products that are sold in the market. Okay, or if you want, the products that contain a good amount of water. So the idea behind is that as far as this Q, it is equal to 1, then there is no problem of quality. But if the some part of our batches or a part of the production is defected, so this Q, it is lower than 1. If it is lower than 1, this is positive, and since this is positive, the company is going to do some additional efforts in order to recover from these defected products. Okay, so this is a very general framework. You have a lot of publications reporting this type of setting. And I would like then to mention the contributions with respect to the literature and with respect to the developments of this concept. And in particular, we look at this conformance quality as a control, so as a strategy that is decided by the manufacturer. Because again, according to the context that we have seen, the manufacturer is deciding how much water to put in a piece of M. Okay, so 5% is a kind of limit, but then the manufacturer is the company who is deciding. So then we have the conformance quality that will be implemented according to a very general and classical quadratic a convex cost function. Then here we are assuming that we are in supply chain, because we are developing a lot of work in supply chain, and because there is a manufacturer, again, who is producing M of a certain quality, but then the retailer, it is selling this M. So it makes sense to have a chain in this type of setting. And we are assuming then there is this manufacturer that I am I'm using the letter M to say that this is a manufacturer who is selling this good to a seller. This can be a store, it can be a retailer, it can be whoever firm who is in the downstream of a supply chain. And this sell happens at a certain wholesale price that is really depending on the quality. And this is, again, an assumption that is driven by the tests that I have given to you. Okay, so if you look at the price difference, this price difference should inform you about the quality of the product. So it makes sense to have a price that is very much depending on the quality. So the manufacturer is facing a production cost of CM. Okay, let me see if I can handle. Wow. And this will be most likely is margin. Okay, so the wholesale price minus the production cost. Then the seller is selling at a certain price P, which is his decision variable. And it is also facing some administrative costs. You may want to think about this administrative cost as invoicing, for example. And then the marginal cost, the marginal revenues for the seller are given by the price that has been fixed by R minus the wholesale price, which is paid to the manufacturer minus these administrative costs. Together with this conformance quality, I would like also to address this entire context according to the marketing literature. And in the marketing literature, we have this definition of goodwill, this capital G, which can be represented as the reputation of the company, how much the customers are willing to purchase from a company that is highly reputed. And generally speaking, in the literature, we use this Narlov and Narov model, which is given by this goodwill that is depending most likely on advertising. And this is well known and well done. What we have to do next is to understand whether this goodwill can also be depending on other variables, on other strategies. And since here we are playing with the pricing, the quality, I do not have advertising, but I could have advertising, but I don't want to have advertising. I would then imagine that the goodwill and then the reputation, or again, if you want, this is the willingness to purchase from a certain brand, depends on the quality. Then I do my tests and I can see, I can experience also the quality of the piece of M. Depends then on the quality. It depends on also on the final price that I am paying, because again, it is a proxy of the quality again. And it depends also from another parameter that here I am writing in these square brackets, and that is represented by the difference between the real quality and something that I am calling reference quality. And in particular, I refer to really this threshold that is being decided by the government. Okay, so now, as far as the quality, it is higher or it is lower than this boundary, this threshold, then this has an effect on the customer's willingness to purchase, on the reputation of the company. So then, in fact, if I am a customer and I know that the company, it is somehow in line with the 5%, then I am okay. I think this is a good company. But if I have another company who is producing with 30% of the water, then I say, okay, this is not going to be the product, the type of product that I want to purchase. And then as this generates a dual problem, one in the sales that we are going to check now, and one also in the goodwill, because gives a long-term effect. Okay, so this goodwill is in fact a state variable, so it's a differential equation, and the motivations for having a dynamic model here, it is given by the fact that this goodwill is an accumulation process that runs over time. It is not something that is given in a certain moment in time and then we live with it. Rather, it is something that I accumulate over time, and that's why I need a process that tells me how this accumulation moves forward. Yes?
It's here that the consumer knows
This is a goodwill for Qms.
Depends on the gap between the threshold and the real percentage. It means that it displayed on the product.
It is somehow displayed on the product
So
because.
an environment where you not only have, say, water, but you sell the percentage of the product.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right, exactly. So, yeah, exactly. So you sell really the quality. Yeah, right.
So it wouldn't apply to your current.
It's in fact a case that
Yeah.
it's a case, okay? It's a reference case, right? And then the demand function will be very classical, so nothing special in here. So I have the market potential, the customer sensitivity to the price, and the customer sensitivity to the goodwill. And in the end, I have this firm S, so the seller, who can understand eventually the consequences for the business. And the consequences for the business are given by the fact that if eventually the quality strategy it is not good, then this is going to affect this G, and this G enters in his objective function, and then this can be problematic for the seller as well, although she has no responsibility for the conformance quality that is decided by the manufacturer. So in that case, since as an indirect interest in also increasing the quality, then we can use all marketing devices or coordination devices that we have in the literature. And today I'm using this cooperative program that is represented by the opportunity given to the to the seller to pay a part of the conformance quality efforts of the manufacturer. And this will be given by this capital B, which is comprised between 0 and 1. If it is 0, it signifies that nothing is supported, so there is no coordination between the two. So the seller doesn't care about the quality strategy of the manufacturer. If instead it is equal to 1, it signifies that all the efforts that the manufacturer would like to put on the quality will be paid by the seller. So I would like to position this goodwill dynamics with respect to the literature, because this is eventually, from a theoretical point of view, the real contribution of the paper. In a sense that when I look back to the literature and I look at all the contributions using this goodwill dynamics, I can see that there are most likely papers published in the marketing literature that are using this goodwill dynamic equation. And there is this publication that is looking at the impact of perceived quality and quality improvement, but there is nothing regarding conformance quality. There are a couple of publications which are looking at two-state problems, where this conformance quality, it is not a control like in this paper, but it is rather a dynamic equation as well. And here the dynamics enters in the dynamics of goodwill. So the problem becomes very much complicated. But again, because I want to refer to this case where the companies are really deciding the quality to be embedded in a product, I'm using a control rather than a state. There have been, again, some additional contributions in which, again, there are two state variables, one for the conformance quality and one for the goodwill, but there is no interface between the two. Okay, so in those publications, they are missing the links between defected products and the impact of these defected products on goodwill. There are other publications which are looking only at quality issues by disregarding completely the goodwill. Other publications which are looking again at the interface between controls and goodwill, but the controls are given by quality improvements, for example, technological developments, rather than defected products and their impact on the reputation. There are a couple of papers which are basically the ones who have initiated this story on conformance quality that are just focusing on operations. Okay, so these are old guys just focused on operations. And then there are also some empirical papers that have been published on the relationship between the conformance quality and goodwill. So in this sense, having an empirical support is always good to better justify the assumptions of the model. So here is my differential gain model. As you can imagine, I'm basically using all the ingredients that I have showed you previously. So I have the two players, one manufacturer and one seller. So both of them are sharing the same demand function. The two guys have two different revenues. So the manufacturer is gaining the wholesale price minus the cost. And here I have again the price minus the wholesale price minus the administrative cost. The manufacturer is deciding some efforts for his conformance quality, and these efforts can be somehow supported by the seller. And for the moment, I am assuming that this B, it is not a decision variable. So this is a parameter by means of which I can derive some managerial recommendations later on. So we are assuming that the manufacturer is optimizing then only with respect to the quality and is basically the chain follower, while I am assuming that S is the leader. And here I'm assuming that S is the leader because, again, the seller who is selling the products in the market can decide whether a certain producer products should be sold or not. Okay, so he is deciding the display of the references in the shelf. So that's why I'm putting here the seller as a leader. When I solve this differential game, I use the traditional procedure of writing the Hamiltonian and then afterwards running a traditional procedure, OR procedure. So basically, first I look at the optimal strategies for the manufacturer. And as you can see, these are very much depending on this parameter B, so the support that eventually he will receive from the seller. When I put everything inside the seller's objective function, I get this expression. And from this expression, I would like to highlight you this term here. Okay, this term here is the term which is bringing complexity to the model, because I have this B squared. And because I have this B squared, if I have B as a decision variable, then I'm not going to get any type of closed form solution. This is then the bill that I have to pay is represented by having this B as exogenous. So it will be most likely a parameter to be used for the analysis. So the observations that we can check here is that, again, we have this quadratic property that doesn't really help us, and that if you do some analysis, it is possible to identify with some comparative statics that the price, it is increasing, and this is common in the marketing literature because we have an interface between the goodwill and the pricing. So if you are able to somehow to increase the goodwill, even if you price more, this doesn't really lead to a decrease of the sales. But this happens till a certain point. And it's interesting to see that the manufacturer is happy to receive a support, but till a certain point. After this point, receiving a support means that he has to invest more. And these investments are somehow damaging his objective function, because here he is paying basically the cost. Oops. He is paying the cost associated to the quality efforts. So this mu tells us that there are some boundaries after which doing too much is not convenient. And the same happens when I do a comparative statics with respect to the quality. So he is willing to invest, but till a certain point in time, then it's better not to do anything. So we can use those first results to derive, to make some conjectures. And by keeping this B as an exogenous parameter, we can conjecture some quadratic value function. And again, we use the dynamic programming algorithm that is very standard in dynamic games. And I would like to highlight the relationships that exist between the first and the fourth equation here, which are linked to the quadratic parameter coefficient for the manufacturer conjecture and the quadratic coefficient for the seller's conjecture. And the relationship here, you can see that those two equations are basically nested. Okay, so they are one inside the other. So when I try to compute analytically those coefficients, well, again, I do not have an analytical solution. Okay, that's because basically we get 4 roots, since we have 2 quadratic terms, so we get 4 roots, and among those roots we need to find the one that works better for us. So I can show you some simulations, but I do not have a closed form. The next thing to be done is to check whether there is any type of coordination mechanism that allows the supply chain to perform better. And honestly, when I look at the literature, there have been a lot of developments on these support programs. This is actually what I am using there. There have been a lot of developments on these revenue sharing contracts, and I can tell you that there are millions of papers using these two mechanisms, but there are very few papers using all other mechanisms that have been suggested in a paper by Cachon in 2003. Now, this is a very nice survey on the coordination mechanisms that supply chains can use in order to coordinate 2 or 3 players. And there are very few developments on everything you find here in the middle. So even though there are only few publications here, I'm not going through them, but rather I'm going through this, the application of this revenue sharing contract. And the idea is now that together with this support program, the manufacturer also decides to go in a more risky situation. And instead of deciding a wholesale price, he engages with the seller through this revenue sharing contract. And the difference with respect to the previous case is represented by the fact that now the marginal revenues are changing. And as you can see, the wholesale price disappeared from here, but rather the manufacturer, it is not charging an wholesale price, but it is receiving a fraction of the pricing that has been charged by the seller. That depends on this parameter phi. This phi is really the sharing parameter and tells us how the two companies have negotiated on the sharing of the revenues. So then the seller, it is basically having lower revenues, so she is retaining a lower amount of revenues, but at the same time she is not paying any wholesale price. Okay, so this is an interesting program because it's an interesting coordination mechanism, as the double marginalization effect is going to be somehow reduced. So we proceed as we have done previously. So we solve the problem, and as you can see, the equations are much more interesting from an analytical point of view. They are much more tractable, but indeed they are tractable because I am removing a big piece from the objective functions. The pricing strategy becomes much more, again, tractable. And at the same time, I would like to highlight here that the pricing strategy, it is not depending anymore on the support. Okay, previously it was very much depending on the B, on how much I am paying of this quality. Now it is not anymore the case. And then we can see that if it is not depending anymore, I do not have a quadratic term here, I do not have a quadratic term there, and then eventually I could treat this case with B as endogenous. This is it. The previous case is somehow not possible, but this is possible. Okay, so it really depends on how these controls are interfacing to each other. Now, differently from the previous case, I can identify a B max that works for both the pricing and the quality strategy, such that I can identify a support that allows me to charge a higher price and to do higher quality, and this is basically the same effect for both, but after the same point, both of them are decreasing. Okay, both of them are decreasing in the same moment. So this is also a nice thing to be positioned with respect to the literature. And again, I want to show you our conjectures. And again, the conjectures here are again quadratic, but differently from the previous case, the quadratic term for the seller, it is now not depending anymore on M1, which is again the coefficient linked to the quadratic term of the manufacturer. So here I can have a nice equation. I can see this is a very nice equation. So I can plug this equation inside this, and I can find M, which means that overall I can find also an analytical solution. So this revenue sharing contract, it is very powerful, right? So now I start to do the comparison between the two to figure out whether the shift from a wholesale price to a revenue sharing contract setting is very convenient, and understand the conditions under which both players are getting into a good negotiation that leads to a Pareto improving solution. The first thing that I wanted to tell you is that independent on all the parameters that I am using and independent of the support program, it happens, I get that basically the price under the revenue sharing contract, it is always lower than the price under the wholesale price contract. And this is, again, something to be positioned with respect to the marketing literature, because in the literature of dynamic games, we have that every time the demand function depends on price as well as also on goodwill, then the price in revenue sharing contract is always larger. Here instead we find a reverse result, basically. Okay, and the next thing to be done is to understand the motivations for having this. But theoretically speaking, this is the motivation for implementing a revenue sharing contract. Reducing the price, eliminating the double marginalization effect. A very sad result that we get is on the goodwill. Here the goodwill says that if I implement the revenue sharing contract, the reputation decreases comparatively to the case in which I have a wholesale price contract. And I say that this is a sad result because indeed it's like I am doing very good in terms of pricing, and as you can see from the third line, this pricing strategy allows me to increase the sales, but in the long run I am losing something in reputation. And then here the decision maker has a trade-off to be analyzed that is represented by implementing a revenue sharing contract, knowing that the price will go down, the sales will go up, and the goodwill will go down. And the trade-off is represented by preferring the short term to the long-term performance, or vice versa. Because the long-term performance are linked to the reputation, to the goodwill that I am accumulating, and the short-term performance are represented by the demand. Okay, So the demand is something that I get now. If I am myopic, I don't care about the future. But if I'm undertaking a revenue sharing contract, I am becoming myopic. So I am not caring about the future. So all these three lines can be very much positioned with respect to the literature, which is very, very controversial. And we get, in fact, some reverse results. And the most interesting one, again, is that the revenue sharing contract allows for the mitigation of the double marginalization effect. That, again, in this type of literature hardly happens. The second result is that when we are under a wholesale price, there is a certain convenience for the seller of offering a support program. And we have discovered that this depends very much on the impact on the reference quality and the term of the reference quality on the goodwill dynamic. Here I do have also the equation. Okay, so it depends very much on the impact of this term. And here I have some simulations. Well, those simulations are very easy, and they will tell me, hey, if I am in the blue line, okay, the blue line tells us that the impact of the difference between quality and reference quality, it is not important, which signifies that customers are basically not really taking care about the existence of a difference between quality and reference quality. Probably, for example, in the case when they do not know that this difference is important. Then in that case, I am, as you can see from here, I'm basically having that the support program, it is not beneficial. Okay, so every time I give a support, the blue line tells me that, well, this is not very much beneficial. But when this term has a huge importance, for example, equal to 0.8, then the manufacturer would like to have a support. Okay, just repeat it. Okay, I can give you mine. Yes.
Okay. Just as you said in the background part, the government said that if the level less than 5%, it will not show on the labels. So it means that for the consumers, they will not know about the percentage of the water less than 5%. So in the differential equations here, if QT greater than 95%, this part should be equals to 0 for consumers, I think. Because I think that means that the differential equation should be a piecewise equations. Here, when the QT greater than 1 minus QR or QT less than QR.
Yeah.
That's
no, here the idea is that this reference quality, although it is true that eventually something is good, it doesn't, if the quality is good, then the customers do not think at all about the fact that it can be defected. Nevertheless, this is an information that is always available in the market. Okay, and even though you purchase a product which is of very good quality, then since you know that exists this regulation that is not helping you, you remain always with the question mark whether this is something true or not. And this is also linked, let me just go back to these results here. So yeah, here, okay. So 8 companies of these 37 are displaying the label, but there is someone who is not displaying the label at all. Okay, so that signifies that together with the fact that customers are not acknowledged overall, it is well possible that there are some companies who are cheating about the water that they have inside. And if this is the case, then customers always remains with the question mark, and then having this part here always inside helps to consider this fact. But indeed, if you want to say either it exists or it doesn't exist, then you have to solve the game differently, as you said, using a piecewise controls or piecewise states helps. Yeah. And finally, regarding this picture, I would like to highlight the green line. Okay, so the green line is somehow half and half. Okay, so the customer considered to be this difference half important. Then, as you can see, you cannot see very well, but this is what it happens. The green line here basically identifies a maximum. Okay, so it is like that, it reaches the maximum and then it decreases again. So here it signifies that, again, this is very much in line with the comparative statics that I've showed you previously, that is till a certain point in time, till a certain support, we are okay and we want to do that. Then afterwards, this is not convenient at all. So for the seller point of view, the best to be done is that customers are well acknowledged. This B should be very, very close to 1, okay? So customers are very acknowledged about this difference between reference quality and real quality, such that they can support the manufacturer in what he is doing. From the manufacturer sides, we can have somehow some different results. And the different results are represented by the fact that even when the knowledge of customers, the B, the small b, it is low, then still they are able to find convenient the support program. I mean, for the seller, it was not convenient in the blue area, but for the manufacturer, it is always good. Okay, and this is linked to the fact that the manufacturer is the one who is putting the money to invest in quality. So if someone wants to pay a part of these expenses, then it will be better off. But we can see again that there is a maximum somehow in this region. So when it is high, it is always okay. But when it is low, then there is a maximum to be reached and to be eventually evaluated by the manufacturer. I would like then to look at some particular cases, because we have understood that this B is the most important parameter. Nevertheless, we are playing the game according to other parameters. And in particular, we are playing the parameters according to the revenue sharing rule. Okay, so this is the way they are sharing the money. And we can see here that from a seller point of view, the implementation of a revenue sharing contract is always worthwhile. Okay, so the blue line here is the wholesale price, and the others are the different levels of revenue sharing contract. So independent on the B, in this case, if it is small, independent on how the game is played, the seller wants always to do revenue sharing contract. And this happens because she is able to decrease a bit the price. From the manufacturer point of view, instead, we can see that we need the revenue sharing rule to be sufficiently large. So for example, only when this revenue sharing rule is 0.3, I can find a combination of support program and revenue sharing contract that allows me to have exactly the same results of the wholesale price contract. So it is complicated. But if the manufacturer, it is getting a sufficiently high amount of money, for example, 35%, then it will be always happy to do so. But then we can give some managerial recommendations. We can say, hey, in order to reach coordination, you have to give a support program and you have to give a sufficiently large sharing parameter to the manufacturer. Okay? If this happens, if the parameter is sufficiently large, then the support program becomes simply less important. And this fact is also evident, for example, from this line. Okay, so independent on the support, the manufacturer profits are not changing that much. Are not changing them. But if we look at the impact of the revenue sharing, this is changing very much the levels. Okay, so it is worthwhile to look more at the revenue sharing contract rather than looking at the support. Then I have some other simulations on instead when this B is high. Okay, so the previous case one was with B low. Now we do it when B is high. And again, B is the parameter that tells me the impact of the difference between the quality and the reference quality. Okay, so when I look at these simulations, I can see that the seller with this purple says that if there are some values for the sharing parameter that allow him to become better off. Okay, so he's interested in engaging in a revenue sharing contract. When I look at the producer, well, he has big problems. He has big problems. And in particular, the support program, it is not interesting for him at all. And the revenue sharing contract, it is not also interesting at all. Managerial prescriptions. If customers are fully aware or are very much aware of the fact that there is a difference or that could be a difference between the reference quality and the real quality, then it is better not to engage at all in coordination because we cannot reach coordination. And again, going back to the definitions that have been given by Cachon, Lariviere on coordination, it is the possibility to implement a mechanism by means of which all firms within a supply chain become better off, economically speaking. So in that case, the implementation of a support program doesn't really help because the manufacturer here always prefers the wholesale price contract. And in terms of revenue sharing also is never preferable. So we can say that if the customers are very much acknowledged on this term, on the presence of reference quality, then coordination is a difficult target. And I have a final simulation on the quality efforts. So this black dotted line is represented by my reference quality, or the reference quality that I'm using for the simulations. And you can see that when the support program is in place, then the manufacturer tends always to invest more, independent of the impact of this reference quality on the goodwill. And that basically the revenue sharing contract should be extremely large to have, for example, 0.25 in order to have the manufacturer engaged in a reference, in a quality that is larger than the reference quality. So operationally speaking, the manufacturer finds the coordination a very difficult target. So here I have the conclusions of the work, which are basically it's a summary of what I have already explained. So more than those ones, I would like to take a couple of more minutes to discuss what should be done next. Okay, so the conformance quality that I am using here can be written in a more general form. And in particular, I am assuming that this is a control and that this control is affecting the objective function in a certain way. But, for example, I'm not saying whether this quality can also affect somehow the production cost. Okay, so writing things differently would probably lead to completely different results. Point number two, I would like to find an algorithm that works better than the algorithm that I am using so far for the case in which I do not have a feasible solution when B is endogenous. Okay, this is still possible. In a sense, it is still possible to sell the paper by using this capital B as a parameter. Okay, it's possible. We have papers in the literature that are using this B as a parameter. Nevertheless, the majority of the papers is treating it as a control. So I would like to find an algorithm that allows me to find a feasible solution when this capital B is also a control. I would extend this paper later to also introduce another player, which is now the government, because one of the major roles is represented by the reference quality. So when having then the government who is deciding the reference quality will be an addition that indeed here I'm capturing by means of a parameter, but it would be a nice extension to have it as a control decided by the government. And then I would also look at some penalties associated to defected products. Again, here we are, and also in reality, the government, it is never penalizing the companies who are selling a ham which contains a lot of water, that is against the customer's health. But if some penalty mechanisms are introduced, so probably the manufacturers are going to adjust their strategy accordingly. Okay, so this ends up my presentation. Thank you for your attention. We have time for questions. You should use the micro.
Sorry. You mentioned that the revenue sharing contract decreases the price, which is good, but it also decreases the goodwill, which is bad. Generally speaking, would you think is a worthwhile research to see whether can we come up with a contract or with a coordination mechanism that can decrease the price, but also increase the goodwill?
Yes, it is, and probably what we should propose as effective mechanism is something that is going to increase the goodwill always, right? Because basically the goodwill is the investments for the future, and yes, I definitely agree. So we need a contract that allows to balance the two. Now here the problem is that in the literature, when other types of contracts are used to increase the goodwill, this also generates an increase of price. And again, this happens because higher goodwill generates larger sales. But since you are selling more, you can also price more. So you don't care. I mean, even if the sales are decreasing a bit, still overall you are getting more customers. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.